Hey guys, tonight we slip into the mists just before dawn, when the frogs go quiet and the mosquitoes start organizing committees. You're barefoot on a creaking wooden pier, squinting across the glassy surface of Lake Texcoco, and what you see ahead makes no sense. Islands float, not boats, not rafts, but full blown islands, covered in lush corn stalks, bushy tomatoes, and sunflowers leaning like they're gossiping with each other. You're about to step onto one of these floating gardens. And yes, it's somehow both wetter and more dangerous than it looks. You take a cautious step and it gives under your weight, soft but steady. A thick grid of roots, mud, woven reeds, and sticks supports the whole thing. It floats, kind of. Technically, it's anchored with willow trees at the corners, so it doesn't just drift off like a salad bar on vacation. But let's be honest, if you trip and fall into the water, you're not getting a towel. You're getting leeches and ancient duck poop. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch down and press your hand into the damp soil. It's warm, almost alive, humming faintly with insects and hidden root systems. The garden is no ordinary plot. You're standing, or floating, on a Chinampa, one of the Aztec Empire's most brilliant inventions. It's a fake island, sure, but also a real farm. It produces up to 7 harvests a year if you're disciplined, patient, and on speaking terms with the gods. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs invented Chinampas from scratch or inherited the method from older civilizations like the Xochimilca or Toltecs. But what's not in question is that they perfected the system into an agricultural superpower. The Mexica, what we now call the Aztecs, turned a swampy lake basin into an edible empire. You glance up. In the distance, the great city of Tenochtitlan shimmers like a stone mirage. It's hard to believe something that big floats on a lake, but it does. Built on a central island and webbed with canals, the city relies on a surrounding forest of Chinampas, like organs feeding blood into a beating heart. You're part of that flow now, if only for the night. A soft splash startles you. It's a canoe, gliding past without a sound. Inside, a man rows with one arm and sprinkles lake water with the other. He's checking the salinity, not with a gadget, but with his tongue and eyes. Too salty, the plants die. Too sweet, the fish die. Everything here is a balance, and everything here matters. And here's where it gets quirky. You spot a scarecrow made of corn husks, wearing a child's mask and tied with red threads. It's not just for the birds, it's a kind of field charm meant to ward off mischievous spirits, jealous neighbors, and that one cousin who always borrows your gourds. Aztec gardening isn't just about growing things, it's about keeping them safe, spiritually and otherwise. The air grows thick as the sun peeks through. You start to sweat, partly from the humidity, partly because you realize the soil beneath your feet is also full of human remains. Not from battle, at least not always, but from sacred funerals, cremations, or even crop blessing rituals. The earth is literally fed with life to give life. Creepy? A little? Effective? You bet. A school of fish ripples beneath your island. Some of them are eaten, others are left alone for the eggs they lay in the Chinampa's submerged edges. Frogs croak warnings like nervous librarians. You wipe your brow and realize you're surrounded by a complete ecosystem, designed and maintained by hand, year after year. Some scholars argue over how much of Tenochtitlan's food came from Chinampas versus tribute from conquered lands. Others think we've underestimated just how productive these floating farms really were. Either way, if you lived here, you ate maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, chilies, and amaranth grown within a canoe's reach. You lean over the edge and see a toad painted with red clay perched on a water lily. It's probably symbolic, maybe sacred, or maybe just nosy. In this world, everything has meaning, especially if it stares at you long enough. By the way, you might want to sleep with one eye open. The water here is known for carrying curses, or at least some very cranky eels. You brush off a mosquito and take a slow breath. The garden sways gently underfoot. You're part of something ancient, messy, and suspiciously advanced. And just when you think you've got the rhythm of this place, you hear a horn blow in the distance. Time to move deeper in, where the real secrets are buried under layers of mud, myth, and maze. Word count, awaiting continue. You step carefully across a narrow log bridge, though bridge might be generous. It's really just a tree trunk with some confidence issues. On either side of you, the lake gurgles as soft winds stir the surface, and the Chinampas rustle with rows of maize, beans climbing like desperate houseguests, and sunflowers stretching into the haze like sun-drunk dancers. A man waves you over with a grin missing exactly 2 teeth. His hands are black with earth, and he gestures to the corner of his Chinampa. Time to build your own. First step? Mud. But not just any mud. This is lake bottom muck, the dark, oozy kind that squishes up between your fingers and smells like yesterday's rain and a bit of frog breath. You plunge your arms in, scoop, and carry. Over and over. This sludge is loaded with nutrients. It's why the Aztecs didn't need fancy plows. No deep tilling, no draft animals, just soft lake beds and clever layering. Next, you lay down reeds. Not just for structure, they repel some insects and keep the mud from sagging. Then come interwoven sticks and branches, laid crisscross to form a lattice. It's equal parts basket and mattress, a living platform to hold up the farm. You're building an island, but more than that, you're building a sponge. Water soaks up, roots grow down, and somehow the whole thing floats and breathes like it's alive. Chinampas aren't free-floating like balloons. They're anchored to the lake bottom with ahuejote trees, a type of willow that grows tall and fast. Their roots weave through the island's guts like rebar in cement. You might be wondering, how long does one of these last? The answer? Indefinitely, if cared for. Some Chinampas in Xochimilco have been in use for over 800 years. Historians still debate whether each new generation rebuilt from scratch or just layered on fresh mud like icing on cake made of algae and sticks. Of course, your hands are shaking now. Building an island is one thing. Maintaining it? That's the real art. Every week, the gardener hauls fresh lake muck onto the surface. It's a full-time relationship. Let the Chinampa go for a few moons and it'll rot or sink or worse, get swallowed by someone else's expansion project. Here's something fun and slightly terrifying. During the rainy season, when Lake Texcoco floods its banks, entire Chinampas have been known to drift loose. If the willow trees aren't strong enough, your precious mini-farm might just float into the horizon like a leafy barge of sadness. And then there's erosion. You squat next to the edge and watch as tiny waves nibble at the banks. To fight this, the Aztecs plant canal reeds and cactus borders. Natural barriers that act like guards in green armor. No plastic, no concrete, just centuries of eco-mastery. One gardener tosses a handful of seeds your way. You plant them in neat lines using a dibble stick, or a kind of wooden spike with a flared end. It's surprisingly satisfying. Poke, drop, pat, over and over. You fall into a rhythm. It feels peaceful until someone sneezes on you from a passing canoe. Surprise! You've been baptized in floating farm pollen. The Aztecs were obsessed with symmetry in their plots. Straight rows, aligned corners. Some scholars believe this wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. In a world ruled by cosmic balance, the Chinampa mirrored the larger universe, order carved from chaos. So if your lines are crooked, maybe the sun god won't notice. Or maybe he'll ruin your bean yield. Who knows? And now for the quirky bit. Some Chinampa farmers planted flowers just for the dead. Marigolds for funerals. White lilies for offerings. The Aztecs saw gardening as both livelihood and liturgy. You didn't just grow food, you grew meaning. Every plant could become incense, dye, medicine, or a gift to a god with very specific tastes and probably a bit of attitude. You sit back, wiping sweat from your nose, and realize this isn't a hobby. This is the spine of an empire. Tenochtitlan's market feeds on these plots. Priests rely on these herbs. Even warriors depend on this steady food source, because you can't conquer the next valley on an empty stomach. Still, historians argue how many people these Chinampas really fed. Some say tens of thousands. Others push the number into the hundreds of thousands. But the numbers matter less than the result. An urban civilization thrived in a swamp, thanks to engineering that looked suspiciously like magic. You yawn and notice the birds, herons standing like old professors, watching you work with mild disdain. A dragonfly lands on your toe. You're now part of the ecosystem, whether you like it or not. And then you hear it, a soft flute in the distance. A signal? A prayer? Maybe just someone goofing off on break. doesn't matter. You're sunburned, muddy, and you smell like organic soup, but you've built something real, something living. You look back at your tiny patch, breathing among its neighbors, and smile. For now, at least, it floats. Word count. Awaiting continue. The sun's now just high enough to turn the lake silver, and your eyes sting a little from the brightness. You shield them with your muddy hand and spot a figure approaching. Broad-brimmed hat, shoulder sash made of woven agave, and an aura of, I've been awake since before the gods yawned. He's a gardener, yes, but also something else. His name is probably lost to time, but around here, people whisper tlamatini, a word that means wise one, but also implies priest, teacher, healer, and occasionally gossip hub. He stops by your Chinampa, kneels, and smudges a bit of ash on the soil. He mutters something to Tlaloc, the rain god, and Chicomeco, the maize goddess. You think it's a prayer, or maybe a weather report. Either way, he smiles afterward, which feels reassuring, unless he's smiling because you just accidentally planted beans on a sacred rest day. These Aztec gardeners aren't just farmers, they're keepers of time and balance. Their calendar isn't just about dates. It's agricultural and religious. When to plant, when to harvest, when to fast, when to sprinkle chili dust on the soil to keep away demons. Each step has meaning, and every mistake might mean a bad harvest, or worse, divine annoyance. You follow him along a canal, where he points out tiny signs in the soil. The burrow of a salamander, a good omen, the wilt of a squash leaf, less good, and a trail of ants marching like they own the place, neutral unless they get into the amaranth seeds. At one stop, he picks up a worm, whispers something to it, then gently tucks it under a maize stalk. You don't ask. Some things are better left to mystery. You arrive at what looks like a garden altar, a woven mat shaded by banana leaves. On it, obsidian blades, flower petals, feathers, and a single cup of blue water. The Tlamatini begins a ritual. Not a huge one, no chanting, no drums, but a soft offering of cacao, a drop of blood from his thumb, and a handful of cornmeal sprinkled clockwise into the canal. It's part science, part superstition, and part performance for the gods who supposedly peek down when they're bored. Historians still argue whether every gardener performed these rituals or if they were reserved for certain festivals. Some say daily offerings were common, others think it was mostly symbolic or limited to higher status farmers with more influence and less back pain. You're offered a taste of something, a paste made of ground amaranth and honey, sweet, nutty, and just a little spicy. It's part snack, part religious item. The Aztecs used amaranth dough to sculpt edible gods during festivals, then broke and ate them. You chew slowly and wonder what part of the god you're munching on. As you rest in the shade, the Tlamatini begins listing the plants on the Chinampa like they're his children. Maize, beans, squash, the Holy Trinity. But also tomatoes, chilies, epazote, and chia seeds. Each has its own rules, its own guardian spirit. You get the sense that gardening here is like playing chess with the universe. Every move matters, and the universe cheats. Now, here's your fringe fact for the day. Some Aztec farmers believed that if you sang nicely to your crops, they grew faster. The practice, called chantli, involved lullabies, work songs, and even poetry whispered between corn rows. Skeptical? Maybe. But your corn plants do seem a little perkier when you hum off-key under your breath. Back on the canal, you pass another gardener, this one older, with fingers like bark and a 1,000-yard stare. He doesn't speak much, but he carries a satchel filled with obsidian flakes, not for fighting, but for trimming, harvesting, and performing minor medical rituals on sick plants. Yes, there's surgery for vegetables now. You live in that kind of world. You pause for a moment, take a deep breath, and realize you've forgotten something important: time. There are no clocks here. Just shadows, bird calls, and the slow procession of clouds across a sun that never rushes. That's probably how they liked it. And speaking of time, the gardener priest hands you a bundle of sticks, each carved with symbols. It's a tonalpoali marker, a piece of the Aztec calendar used to predict the best days to plant, harvest, or even argue with your in-laws. Historians still can't agree how exactly it worked in daily life, but the gardeners definitely lived by it, like a farmer lives by the weather app. Except their app was 260 days long and required a dream interpreter. As you lie down in the shade for a moment, head resting on a sack of pumpkin seeds, the smell of wet earth clings to your skin, Bees buzz nearby, lazy and harmless, as the wind stirs through the corn above. You've barely worked half a day, and already you feel like a walking corn husk yourself. And yet, something clicks. This is more than food. This is culture, calendar, medicine, ritual. The Chinampa isn't just a floating farm, it's a sacred organism. And its caretakers? A blend of priest, farmer, engineer, and philosopher, dressed in straw hats and armed with wisdom you'll never fully grasp. You doze for just a second, but when you open your eyes, the Tlamatini is gone. Only his footprints remain, pressed lightly into the edge of the Chinampa, already softening into the mud. Awaiting continue. A sharp whistle wakes you, not angry, but insistent, like someone calling a dog who's about to do something impressive or stupid. You sit up, blink a few times, and there it is, a canoe convoy gliding across the canal. Each boat is piled high with vegetables, herbs, flowers, and inexplicably a live turkey looking only mildly outraged by its situation. You hop into a waiting canoe, your paddle carved from ahuehote wood, smooth as polished bone. The Chinampa slips behind you, and now you're flowing through the liquid highways of Tenochtitlan's rural outskirts. This is no lazy Sunday paddle. This is commute, cargo run, and ceremonial procession all in one. Up ahead, the canals fork and merge like veins in a leaf, and it hits you. This place wasn't just designed for survival. It was optimized. Tenochtitlan had over 50 miles of canals, some wide enough for trade barges, others narrow like alleyways between backyard gardens. Floating farms nestled between watery boulevards, and every family had a boat like you might have a bike. The Aztec market system thrived on this aquatic infrastructure. Every morning, traders ferried goods from their Chinampas to Tlatelolco, the grand market of markets. You're heading there now. The air smells of chilies, masa, and anticipation. The water sloshes quietly beneath you, and your canoe creaks with the weight of produce and potential profit. Beside you, another boat glides past. A woman with salt and pepper braids steers with one hand and fans herself with a dried agave leaf in the other. Her boat is stacked with cempasúchil flowers, those golden-orange marigolds used for death rituals. She nods, serious, probably pricing out your tomato bundles in her head. Then, a traffic jam. Canoes bottleneck at a narrow bend where a fallen ahuehote branch creates a floating speed bump. A teen in one boat tries to paddle over it, tips sideways, and falls in with a splash and a scream. Everyone claps politely. The turkey in the next boat gobbles disapprovingly. Your cargo shifts as you laugh, and one tomato bounces out into the canal. It floats. So does your pride. Eventually, you reach a wide, open plaza dock. Canoes nest like geese, each one unloading goods, gossip, and the occasional rat. You step out into Tlatelolco Market, the economic heart of an empire. It's chaos and order, religion and retail, bargaining and blessings. You smell roasted maize, hear the ring of obsidian knives slicing cactus pads, and feel your sweat start to return as the crowd thickens. Over 60,000 people pass through this place daily, according to conquistadors who were both impressed and weirdly jealous. Historians still argue whether those Spanish accounts were accurate or exaggerated. But let's be honest, they were definitely overwhelmed. You spread out your wares on a reed mat, maize, squash blossoms, some herbs you can't pronounce but were assured are for love potions or soup, maybe both. Around you, merchants hawk salt cakes, cocoa beans, dog meat for special occasions, vanilla pods, jade trinkets, obsidian tools, and even slaves. That last one stings. A grim reminder that no civilization, no matter how brilliant its gardens, is free of shadow. Now comes the weird part. You see a woman trade 3 chilies for a woven comb, and a man offer 20 cocoa beans for a cotton cloak. No gold, no silver, just barter and cacao. That's right, cocoa beans were currency. A good cloak might cost 100 beans. A turkey? Maybe 200. A night in a sketchy part of town? That'll be 2 counterfeit beans and a headache. Back at your mat, a noble-looking man inspects your squash. He frowns, nods, and offers you 5 obsidian arrowheads. You hesitate. Is that fair? Who knows? This place runs on reputation and rhythm, not fixed pricing. You nod anyway. He bows. You now own 5 sharp little promises you'll definitely try not to sit on. Over at a temple outcropping near the market's edge, a priest blesses goods with copal smoke, the white incense curling into the morning like ghostly vines. Some farmers drop a small offering, A flower, a bit of dried fruit, a whispered thanks for no hailstorms this week. You grab a quick snack from a vendor, a tlacoyo, thick tortilla stuffed with mashed beans and cactus, topped with green salsa and just enough chili to cause a mild identity crisis. It's perfect. You chew slowly as a parade of dancers winds past, bodies painted, feathers flashing. Something ceremonial, something political, or just lunchtime entertainment? You don't ask. It all blurs in the sun. And here's today's curious quirk. Aztec tax collectors often took garden produce as payment. If you lived on a Chinampa, part of your output went straight to the state, sometimes willingly, sometimes with a stern reminder and a guard in tow. Tomatoes, maize, flowers, even frogs. Yes, frogs. Tenochtitlan needed them for food, medicine, and the occasional slightly awkward festival. Historians debate just how oppressive the tax system was. Some say it was efficient and fair. Others argue it was exploitative. Either way, gardeners learned early on to overplant, just in case the taxman came calling during a rough harvest. You paddle home in the late afternoon, canoe lighter but heart heavier. The lake glows amber. The Chinampas dot the water like lily pads drawn by someone with very neat handwriting. And you realize this wasn't just agriculture. It was civilization made fluid, floating on a swamp that refused to be tamed, but offered partnership to those clever enough to listen. The city fades behind you. The birds return, and your Chinampa waits, breathing, blooming, and hungry for the next day's labor. Or waiting, continue. The next morning starts not with sunlight, but with sound. A low, earthy beat pulses through the mist, drums, steady and slow, echoing across the water like the heart of the lake itself. You blink awake on your reed mat, stretch, and wonder if it's a festival, a ceremony, or something more serious. You paddle toward the noise, past Chinampas draped in early dew. The air smells like wet wood, crushed herbs, and the faint bitterness of smoke. At the center of a small canal junction, you find it. A funeral for a farmer. Not a grand priest or warrior, just a man whose Chinampa once bloomed bright with squash and hummingbirds. The community gathers in silence. His canoe, now his funeral barge, floats gently, piled with his tools, his favorite seeds, and a garland of white flowers. There's even a bowl of cacao and a small obsidian hoe laid across his chest like a knight's sword. The priest mutters in Nahuatl, the ritual language, asking the earth to accept his body, the water to carry his soul, and the gods to remember he always paid his harvest taxes on time. Then, slowly, the boat is guided toward the deeper waters beyond the Chinampa zone. Not to sink, but to symbolically depart. You feel it again, that weight of reverence these people have for farming. It's not a job, it's a sacred cycle, every bit as spiritual as war or temple offerings. Life grows, life feeds, life returns to the soil. Historians still argue whether ordinary people were cremated, buried, or sent off like this in canoes. Some believe these rites were mostly reserved for special occasions. Others think this fluid farewell was common for lakeside communities, floating gardens, floating graves, floating lives. As the boat fades into the mist, the people don't cry, they plant. You return to your own patch and begin the day's work. But today, you're not alone. From behind a nearby willow, a young apprentice appears. Barely 12, reed thin, eyes too big for their head. They say nothing but carry a small bag of seeds tied at the waist. You know the drill. Time to teach. You start with maize, of course. Always maize. The gods themselves chewed it from the bones of the earth. You show them how to plant three sisters, maize, beans, squash, together in a perfect trio. The corn grows tall and proud, the beans climb its stalks, and the squash sprawls at the base, protecting the soil. A team, like all good things in life. Then you take them to a patch of medicinal plants, episode, wormseed, and even a few magic mushrooms tucked discreetly in the shade. The apprentice stares wide-eyed. Not for fun, you say, for ritual and healing. Though some shamans claim a certain mushroom let them see the gods giggling behind the sky. You guide them to the beehives at the edge of the plot, wrapped in agave leaves. Aztec bees are tiny and stingless, but their honey is sacred. You pull a comb, taste a drop. It's spicy, floral, electric. The apprentice makes a face. You smile. Their tongue's not ready yet. Next, the fish pen. You show them how the Aztecs practiced early aquaculture, keeping fish and waterfowl in floating corrals beside the Chinampa. ducks for feathers, fish for food, and a constant stream of rich organic waste that doubled as fertilizer. Nothing here goes to waste. Even duck poop has a destiny. Here's your quirky detail for the day. Some Chinampa farmers trained herons to catch fish for them. Seriously. Herons were fed bits of fish as rewards, and over time they'd scoop up live catches and drop them at their keeper's feet like scaly tributes. It wasn't common, but it happened enough that poets wrote about it. The apprentice laughs at that one, then looks up, serious again. You hand them a seed. And now for today's scholarly gray zone. Were apprentices usually family members or community assigned? Some researchers suggest the Chinampa system relied heavily on inheritance, knowledge passed down generation to generation. Others argue kids were often sent from other villages to learn and spread techniques. Maybe both, maybe neither. The Aztecs weren't big on leaving behind autobiographies. You tell them about the signs, how a plant's color, shape, or even smell can predict the future. A maize stalk that twists clockwise? Good luck. A chili that flowers in threes? Watch your back. You explain how the soil speaks, but only to those who listen with their feet and dig with their whole spine. As the sun hits its peak, you break for lunch, tamales wrapped in squash leaves filled with beans and a pinch of wild herbs. You split one with the apprentice. They thank you in Nahuatl, then scarf it down like it's their last meal. Nearby, a hawk circles overhead, watching. Maybe for mice, maybe for meaning. By late afternoon, the apprentice is already planting solo. Clumsy but determined, you watch them work with quiet pride and a little envy. They'll get good, maybe even better than you. One day, this whole floating patch might be theirs. You lie back on a pile of reeds, watching clouds slide across the lake like lost gods looking for parking. For a moment, you wonder, how long will these floating gardens last? Will they survive storms, invasions, time? You close your eyes, and the answer comes not in words but in warmth. The kind that rises from dark soil, floats on water, and sticks to your skin like pollen. The apprentice hums a quiet tune. The corn sways, and the Chinampa, alive as ever, carries you both into tomorrow. Awaiting continue. By now, you move like you belong here. Paddle cutting smoothly, nose immune to swampy funk, fingers already dirt-stained before sunrise. But today, there's a new assignment from the local Kalpuli leader, the community elder who oversees not just farming, but taxes, marriages, and which uncle is allowed to play flute at ceremonies. You've been called to assist with soil blessing duties, which sounds relaxing, until you realize it involves both fire and chanting. You row to a central altar near the Chinampa crossroads, where a small group has already gathered. The priest is preparing a ritual to awaken the soil. He crushes dried marigold petals in his palm, tosses a few cacao beans into a clay bowl, and lights copal resin, which smokes like a holy campfire that's also suspiciously citrusy. This isn't superstition. Not entirely. It's science with a soundtrack. The Aztecs believed soil wasn't just dirt. It was alive, and needed thanks if you wanted your squash to not taste like spite. Soil fertility was spiritual business. You kneel next to a grandmother who leans in and whispers, "Don't sneeze when he sings. Bad luck." Noted. The priest begins his chant, rhythmically calling out to Tleltutli, the earth deity, sometimes pictured as a crocodile monster, sometimes as a hungry mother who demands payment in blood or maize. Crocodile Mom is moody. He pricks his finger and lets a single drop fall onto the soil. You wince. The rest of the group offers flowers, seeds, or small foods. You offer a fresh chile, picked this morning, fiery enough to wake up a tired god. This ancient rite connects you, body and breath, to the soil beneath your knees. You feel it in your ribs. Historians still debate whether this ritual was daily, seasonal, or reserved for planting festivals. Some argue it was tied to the Aztec solar calendar, aligning with moon phases or market cycles. Others suggest farmers improvised. Whenever things got weird, they lit some copal and hoped for rain. You return to your Chinampa with that smoky blessing clinging to your skin. And now, it's maintenance time. You're not just growing things, you're keeping a floating world from unraveling. You start by checking the ahuejote trees. They're the scaffolding of the Chinampa, tall, lanky willows with roots that anchor the soil and branches that break the wind. But their job is more than structural. They also cycle nutrients, drawing minerals from the water and dropping leaves that compost into the raised beds. You spot one tree looking a bit peaky, leaves drooping, possibly root rot. You grab a digging stick and start aerating the soil around it. Light, gentle, like fluffing a pillow for someone you respect, but also fear might fall on you. Then it's on to the water channels. The mud has started to clog again. That means one thing. It's time to stir the muck. You take a long-handled paddle and begin sloshing the silt, slowly breaking up the accumulation of algae and sediment. The water turns opaque, almost silky. Why do this? Because Chinampas are hungry beasts. Their fertility relies on constant nutrient cycling. And that means recycling lake sediment onto the garden beds. It's a messy ritual, equal parts gardening and plumbing. You scoop the muck into baskets, haul it up, and spread it across the maize rows. The smell? Somewhere between rich compost and wet sock, but the plants love it. And now for your quirky tidbit of the day. Aztec gardeners sometimes used fermented human urine to enrich Chinampa soil. Yep, golden rain fertilizer. A bit disturbing? Absolutely. Effective? Also yes. Pee was collected in jars, aged for a few days, think of it as a vintage, and poured into the canals to boost algae growth. The algae in turn fed the fish and fueled the crops. A weirdly efficient, slightly gross, deeply clever cycle. You keep working. Repair a collapsed planting bed wall using reeds and mud. Harvest a few wilted beanstalks to make room for new ones. Trim back a creeping vine that seems determined to annex your squash patch. Time flows differently on a Chinampa. Not hour by hour, but plant by plant. One weed pulled, one frog relocated, one flower unexpectedly blooming where none should have. You're in it now, the long game, and you're not the only one playing it. A neighboring farmer shouts across the canal, something about a stolen gourd. It turns into a shouting match. Accusations fly. Apparently, the gourd in question was particularly large and unusually handsome. Tempers rise. Until someone suggests a trial by canoe race. You blink. This is a thing? Yes. In some communities, minor disputes were settled through canoe challenges, a weirdly elegant mix of sport and justice. The two rivals get in their boats, race a predetermined loop, and the winner gets the gourd, or at least the community's sympathy. They paddle off like furious ducks. You sit down and snack on roasted amaranth. This is peak Chinampa drama. As evening falls, the canal's quiet. A breeze ripples the water, bending the reflections of trees and sky like melted glass. Birds settle, frogs croak lazily. The day folds itself up like a wet blanket and says, "See you tomorrow." You drift home by moonlight, passing other Chinampas still glowing from firelight or quiet song. Some farmers sing to their plants, others whisper. A few just lie there, staring at the stars, wondering if the maize will sprout on time. And you just breathe. Inhale smoke, soil, lake. Exhale whatever this was, a ritual, a renovation, a reminder. The earth is awake now. Awaiting continue. The next day, you rise before the birds. That's not a poetic flourish. The herons are still dozing with their beaks tucked into their feathers. You're on the water before dawn, slicing through glassy black canals under a sky painted in pre-sunrise purples and golds. Why so early? Because today is market day, and your canoe is packed to the edges with the best of your Chinampa's bounty. You've spent all week preparing. Bunches of amaranth greens, fat squashes with sun-dappled skins, chilies sorted by heat level, mild to ruin your friendships, and a small batch of bee honey sealed in a gourd bottle. You even have some cempasúchil flowers to trade, bright orange, fragrant, and believed to guide spirits on the Day of the Dead. The boat smells like life. You aren't going alone. The apprentice is curled at the bow, clutching a woven basket full of miniature maize dolls you made together last night, part offering, part fun, part trade bait. Their eyes sparkle in the early light, a little nervous. First market run. You paddle south, joining a slow parade of other canoes, dozens of them emerging from the fog like an armada of floating grocery stores. Some carry goods, others carry gossip, and all are heading toward the same place, the Tlatelolco market, the pulsing heart of the Aztec economy. It's enormous. When you arrive, it's already buzzing. Tlatelolco was the largest marketplace in the entire Aztec world, hosting up to 60,000 people on its busiest days. It's more than a trading post. It's a spectacle, a stage, a stadium of smells. You dock your canoe at the landing zone and haul your goods up into the market square. The air is loud with shouting, haggling, singing, and laughter. The scent cocktail, tortillas grilling, fish drying, herbs hanging, bodies sweating. Somehow, it works. You set up your mat between a weaver selling cloaks and a boy peddling salamanders in jars. No, really, used for medicine or dinner. The apprentice looks horrified. You shrug. Different strokes, different stomachs. Your first customer is a priest who buys 3 squash, not because he likes squash, but because you wrapped them in maize husks shaped like tiny serpents. Presentation matters. Then come a string of traders. Some from the coast with salt and fish, others from the highlands with obsidian tools, and still others offering chocolate discs embossed with God's faces. You swap for dried avocado leaves, a clay cup shaped like a jaguar's head, and some cactus jelly candy that the apprentice demolishes before you can protest. Now, for your daily weird but true tidbit. In some parts of the empire, cacao beans were used as currency. That's right, money grew on trees. A turkey cost about 200 beans. A tamale could be bought for 1. But you had to be careful. Some counterfeiters would hollow out real cacao beans and stuff them with dirt. No one likes dirty money. As you're tallying your earnings, mostly by counting what you no longer have, you hear a commotion near the center of the plaza. A group of boys is clustered around a performer. You nudge your apprentice and walk over. There, in the middle of it all, is a storyteller, balancing on a flat stone and reciting tales of the floating gardens. But he's not just talking. He's singing, weaving in flute tunes, body movements, and even using gourds as drums. He tells of a man who fell in love with a maize spirit, married her in a field of sunflowers, and was never seen again, except when the corn ripens too early. People laugh, some toss him food. The apprentice is transfixed, and here comes the academic toss-up of the day. Were markets like Tlatelolco strictly economic, or also centers of cultural exchange and governance? Some scholars argue they were just business hubs. Get in, trade your onions, get out. But mounting evidence suggests they were also where news spread, alliances formed, and the pulse of the empire could be felt. A civic organism disguised as a shopping trip. You wander a little, sampling tamarind paste on a leaf, watching a man juggle chili peppers, poor life choice, and hearing a woman argue over the price of smoked frog legs. You trade your last squash for a small obsidian blade, more ceremonial than practical, but beautiful. And sharp, very sharp. When the sun begins to dip, you pack up what's left, mainly a few herbs and your now sticky apprentice, and return to the canoe. The trip back is slower. The paddle drags. The boat rides lower, heavier with trade goods and stories. The lake is calm, wide, reflective, like it's listening. As you near your home Chinampa, you pass others unloading their wares, lighting fires, or laughing with neighbors. You wave at the woman who once lent you a fishing net and got it back with a hole in it. She glares, then smiles. Peace. You unpack the canoe. The apprentice, barely staying awake, mumbles something about frog legs and passes out on a pile of squash leaves. You take a moment, stretch your back, breathe in the scent of wet wood and roasted corn wafting from a neighbor's fire. Then you look up at the stars, not the glittering kind, but the faintly glowing ones. The milky glow of Chinampas at night, ringed with lanterns like stars that fell and decided to farm. Tomorrow, it all begins again, but for now, you rest. Word gating, continue. Dawn again, but this one comes laced with tension. As you rise from your woven mat and stretch your sore shoulders, something feels off. The birds are quieter. The water carries an edge of stillness, like it's waiting for something. You paddle slowly toward the Chinampa and notice a few neighbors huddled on the shore, muttering under their breath. One gestures to the sky, another to the water. You follow their gaze. There's been a water level drop, subtle, but enough that your Chinampa's southern edge is sagging, water pooling at the base where it should be neatly braced by reeds. You feel it in your stomach before you see it. Part of your planting bed is beginning to collapse. You rush forward, dropping your basket of seedlings, and squelch into the muck. There's already a break in the reed wall. Water is seeping through, dragging nutrient-rich soil with it, one slow, silent leak. It's an emergency. You shout for help. The neighbor with the dog and the 3 cousins comes running, already carrying extra reeds and mud. This isn't unusual. Chinampa collapse is part of the game. And part of the reason these gardens are so impressive, they're fragile ecosystems, but when the community pulls together, they're also resilient. Working together, you begin to repack the wall. One person layers fresh reed bundles, another presses down clay. You're tasked with trimming willow branches and weaving them into a temporary brace. It's muddy, messy, slippery work, and at one point, you lose your sandal and mutter something that earns a scolding from an elder woman standing ankle deep in the mess. She hands you a new reed sandal from her basket, like she expected this to happen. As the wall stabilizes, you start to breathe again. The bed will survive, for now. But this scare raises a deeper question. Historians still argue whether Chinampas were naturally stable long-term, or if constant maintenance made them only barely sustainable. Some evidence suggests that without regular intervention, beds would sink, silt would overtake the canals, and the ecosystem would collapse in just a few seasons. Others believe the Aztecs had secret, long-term engineering tricks we haven't fully uncovered. You stand there in your soggy clothes thinking, yeah, probably both. While the mud dries under your fingernails and the sun climbs, you switch to a less panicked task. Pest control. Aphids, beetles, caterpillars, they all love Chinampas. The ecosystem is lush, yes, but that also means it's full of things that chew. You gently lift the leaf of a squash plant and spot a cluster of tiny white larvae. You and begin to flick them off into a nearby container. Natural pest control is key here. No chemical sprays. Instead, the Aztecs used everything from crushed chili mixtures to strategically planted flowers that repel or distract insects. Some farmers even bred ladybugs as allies, releasing them like little winged assassins into the fray. Speaking of weird pest control, here's your quirky fact for the day. Some Chinampa farmers use ducks as security systems, quack-powered pest patrol. These feathered mercenaries would swim through the canals, gobbling up larvae and aquatic bugs. Bonus, they pooped in the water, which fertilized the floating gardens. And they rarely complained. But pests aren't your only concern. This week marks a special point in the Aztec agricultural calendar, the beginning of Etzalcoatlistli, the Festival of the Rains. And that means one thing, Tlaloc season. Tlaloc, god of rain, lightning, and occasionally terrifying frog-related artwork, is the one you must now appease. The community gathers near the edge of the wetlands, where a stone altar rests beneath a cluster of ahuejote trees. You're carrying an offering, fresh amaranth cakes and a small clay frog. The air hums with anticipation and thunder. The clouds are gathering like an audience. As the priests begin their chanting, dancers appear wearing frog masks, green, glossy, cartoonish, and just the tiniest bit creepy in the low light. They stomp and croak in rhythmic patterns, mimicking the rainy season's first sounds. Children throw flower petals into the canal. The water responds with ripples. The wind shifts. Offerings are floated on small rafts, cakes, flowers, even feathers, and gently pushed into the lake. One raft flips, dumping its contents. Everyone gasps. Bad omen? Or just clumsy carp? And here comes the academic toss-up. Some believe these rituals were symbolic reenactments of myth, dramatic reminders that humans must feed the gods to be fed in return. Others argue they had practical purposes, marking the communal start of irrigation schedules and collective work days. As usual, religion meets logistics. The rain begins lightly as the ceremony ends, just enough to slick the stones and soften the soil. You smile. It worked? Or maybe it just timed out perfectly. Either way, the air smells like earth and electricity. Your Chinampa sighs in relief. Back home, you cover your most delicate seedlings with leaf tents, shielding them from the first heavy rains to come. Then you boil some beans, roast a few chilies, and settle down to eat with muddy hands and a full heart. Your apprentice appears with a curious look. They ask if you really believe Tlaloc controls the rain. You pause. Does it matter? You say. As long as it rains. And with that, you sleep. Mud under your nails, the rhythmic plop of rain on lake water just outside your hut. The Chinampa held. The gods, it seems, are listening, awaiting continue. The rains keep coming, and soon the canals swell with fresh, cool water. Your Chinampa, newly patched and grateful, drinks it in like a sponge. The willows seem taller overnight, their roots wriggling deeper into the watery beds. Your apprentice marvels at how fast the beans have grown. Just a few days ago, they were green wisps, and now they're climbing the trellis like overachievers. This time of year is known among farmers as the thick season. Everything thickens roots, leaves, the air, even the conversation. Your neighbors talk of spirits that rise in steam from the wet earth, of dreams growing heavier under cloudy skies. And your work shifts too. This isn't planting or patching season. This is the deep maintenance stretch, the time when you clean and dredge the canals. It's muddy business, but necessary. The water slows this time of year, clogged with leaves, sediment, and the occasional uninvited duck. If you don't clear it out, it stagnates, and stagnation is the enemy of a floating garden. You load your canoe with long-handled dredging baskets, which resemble oversized colanders on sticks. It's slow work. Paddle, scoop, dump. Paddle, scoop, dump. Your back starts to complain. Your apprentice sings songs to pass the time, mostly about frogs. They're in a frog phase, and as you dredge, you start to notice patterns. How silt settles differently in shallow bends. How cattails cluster like sentinels where the current weakens. You're not just a gardener anymore. You're a water engineer, part of a millennia-old tradition of watching how land and water court one another. This is where scholars get misty-eyed. Aztec water management wasn't just practical, it was philosophical. The balance of earth and water, of solid and soft, of control and surrender, these weren't just design principles. They were moral principles, embedded in everything from architecture to agriculture to prayer. And yes, that might sound a little lofty when you're knee-deep in canal sludge with a beetle in your boot, but out here, surrounded by water and life and mosquito swarms the size of bad decisions, it starts to make sense. You dig out a chunk of black, nutrient-rich silt and hold it up to the light. It's glistening, soft, almost silky. You smear a bit between your fingers, then toss it back in the canoe. This stuff, it's gold. Aztec farmers used it to refresh the surface of their Chinampas, like refrosting a cake. It keeps nutrients circulating and plants thriving. Now for your daily quirky tidbit. During the height of the Aztec Empire, human waste was collected and sold, yes, sold, as fertilizer for Chinampas. People would actually pay for night soil. So technically, your ancestors were in the luxury poop business. Imagine trying to explain that to your neighbors today. Anyway, back to work. You and your apprentice dredge until midday when the sun finally breaks through the clouds. The mist burns off the canal surface and everything shimmers. You take a break under a willow, eat tamales wrapped in corn husks, and watch two dragonflies duel above the water. The apprentice falls asleep mid-chew. Classic. Later that afternoon, you switch gears and paddle to a friend's Chinampa a few channels over. He's having flower trouble. His marigolds are wilting despite the rains. You inspect the soil, sniff the leaves, ask about shade and drainage. Eventually, you diagnose it: root rot from overwatering. You recommend spacing out the beds and lifting the roots on mounds. Nothing fancy, just thoughtful. That's the beauty of this system. Chinampa farming was never about brute force. It was about sensitivity. Each plant, each patch of soil, each water channel required a kind of empathy. It's a weird word for farming, but out here it fits. You don't fight nature, you co-parent with it. On the way back, you spot something strange: a white heron perched on a stake, completely still. Your apprentice points and whispers, "That's a sign." You raise an eyebrow. Turns out, herons were messengers in some Aztec beliefs, creatures that moved between land, water, and sky. Seeing one linger near your Chinampa could mean good fortune or a warning. You decide to take it as both. And now for the open scholarly debate. Were Chinampas truly as widespread and effective as we imagine, or have we mythologized them through colonial records and modern nostalgia? Some researchers argue the Chinampa system was only viable in certain lake zones, with limited scalability. Others say it was the secret behind feeding hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, in central Mexico. The truth? Probably somewhere between mud and miracle. As the sun sets, you finish unloading your silt, pile it at the edge of your beds, and rake it into place. Your hands are blistered, your legs cramping, but your heart feels oddly light. The Chinampa glows in the gold-pink dusk. Fireflies blink on. The canals hush, and suddenly you get it. This isn't just agriculture. This is ritual. Every scoop of mud, every clipped reed, every root lifted and resettled. It's a kind of prayer. A thank you to the land that floats but doesn't drift. That gives but expects care in return. You light a small clay lamp near your water entrance, a tradition borrowed from your grandmother. Not many people do it anymore, but you like the way the flame flickers across the water, reflected 1,000 times. Your apprentice is already curled up in the canoe, arms around a tamale and legs sticking out at impossible angles. You gently move them to the mat, throw a woven blanket over their shoulders, and let the sounds of frogs, reeds, and lapping water lull you both to sleep. Tomorrow, more dredging, maybe more dragonflies, maybe another heron. You hope so. Awaiting, continue. You wake to something different today. Not the usual morning light filtering through reed mats, not the drip drip from the roof corners, but a drum beat. Dull, repetitive. It echoes across the canals like a heartbeat. Too distant to panic over, but too persistent to ignore. By the time you reach your Chinampa, you can see the commotion on the far bank. A delegation from the capital has arrived. Tenochtitlan's officials, feathers bright and scowls brighter, gliding down the canal in carved canoes. They've brought scribes and measuring sticks. This is either very good or very bad. As it turns out, they're here for a production survey, one of the emperor's routine check-ins on how the empire's belly is being filled. Your Chinampa is not only a floating garden, it's now a data point. You greet them with the best food you can muster: steamed fish wrapped in hoja santa leaves, a warm cup of poke, and roasted squash seeds. They nod, nibble, and then launch into measurements and questions. How many beds? How many workers? How often do you dredge? What crops do you rotate? Which ones go to market? Which to tribute? Are there pests? You resist the urge to say yes, and some wear fancy headdresses. The scribes are efficient. Their styluses scratch into bark paper. You answer each question carefully, aware that everything you say becomes part of a report, which then becomes part of policy. You're not just a farmer now. You're a civil servant with muddy toes. The empire depends on Chinampas like yours. Tenochtitlan, with its population bursting at the seams, couldn't survive on dryland farming alone. Chinampas, floating just outside the city, were its breadbasket, or more accurately, its maize cake basket. Every tamale, every bowl of stew that fed the urban masses probably started in a place like this. And here's your mainstream historical fact. The Chinampa zone around Lake Xochimilco and Lake Chalco may have supported over 20,000 hectares of arable land. That's enough to feed several 100,000 people, all within paddling distance of the capital. But here's the weird wrinkle. One recorded method of tribute involved delivering live eels, frogs, and salamanders in little woven baskets. Not for farming, just for the emperor's pleasure. Imagine getting taxed in squishy amphibians. The officials don't ask for those, thankfully. Just maze projections and water table depth readings. As the scribes finish, one of them, not much older than your apprentice, lingers behind and asks something unexpected. Do you believe this place floats? You pause. It's a strange question from someone who just spent the morning measuring its very real, very muddy surface. But you know what they mean. On maps, Chinampas are marked as land. In tax ledgers, they're farms. But in your soul, they're something else, something in between. You answer, it floats the way a dream floats. They nod like they understand. Maybe they do. After the delegation leaves, you gather your apprentice and neighbors. A plan has formed. If the state is watching, you better put your best plants forward. The group decides to prepare for a communal planting ceremony, a mix of religious offering and public spectacle, where everyone brings their best seedlings and reinforces the idea that this land, not quite land, is sacred and functional and loyal. This means prep work, lots of it. You spend the next few days helping organize the seed swap, a dizzying barter of maize varieties, squash with different curl patterns, and even a few experimental chili strains. Someone offers you a purple bean that supposedly makes you dream of jaguars. You decline. You've got enough going on in your sleep already. You also help decorate the canal entrance with flower chains and floating candles. At night, the whole Chinampa zone turns into a glowing net, lanterns bobbing, music drifting over the water, drums thudding like heartbeats again. But this time, it's celebratory. The kind of sound that calls gods instead of tax collectors. The planting ceremony is half pageant, half farm chore. You line up your seedlings, perfect, proud, trembling in the breeze. The priest wades into the water, paints a sigil with crushed marigold, and mutters something to the lake. Then everyone plants at once, a whole city of hands plunging into soil with a shared breath. This, you think, is how empires survive, not just with laws and war, but with rhythm. The rhythm of planting and promise, the trust that things grow. And here's our scholarly debate of the day. Did the state build its empire because of Chinampas? Or did the Chinampa system grow because the empire needed it? Historians argue over chicken-egg scenarios like this all the time. Maybe both are true. Maybe that's how cycles work. As the crowd disperses and the night quiets, you notice the heron again, perched exactly where you saw it before, watching. Always watching. You tell your apprentice it's a sign. They roll their eyes. Everything's a sign with you. You smile. That's because everything matters out here. Later, you lie on your mat, staring at the thatched ceiling, the scent of crushed marigold still in your nose. The day was long. The soil is full. The lake for now is calm. Your apprentice mumbles in their sleep, "Do we float?" You whisper back, unsure if they hear it. We all do. Awaiting continue. You're jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of splashing. Violent splashing. You sit up fast, nearly knocking over your cup of leftover atole. Outside, the canal is chaos. Your apprentice is flailing in a dugout canoe, trying to steer with a paddle that somehow snapped in half. The culprit? A stubborn current, stirred up by the first major storm of the season. You scramble outside barefoot, mud squeezing between your toes, and toss them a spare paddle. They right themselves, soaked but triumphant. "Totally fine," they shout, sneezing. "Everything's under control." Their head is covered in lily pads. The rains came early this year, and with them, a new phase of Chinampa life. Weather defense mode. You've made it through planting and tribute and social ceremonies. Now you battle the elements, and not just with buckets and prayers. This is where the brilliance of the Chinampa system really shines in its response to weather extremes. While dryland farms wither under drought or drown in floods, your floating fields flex and absorb. They're a living buffer between chaos and cultivation. Still, you're not invincible. That afternoon, you check your anchoring posts, the willow stakes driven deep into the lake bed that keep your Chinampa from drifting. Most are fine, but two have loosened. You and the apprentice work quickly, hammering them back in with a heavy stone mallet wrapped in deer hide. Each strike echoes across the canal like a warning. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Chinampas weren't just floating rafts. They were artificial peninsulas, anchored to the lake bed and reinforced constantly. Think of them as floating gardens with roots. Built from layers of mud, vegetation, and woven mats, they became part of the landscape, flexible yet firm. But here's a fringe tidbit for the stormy season. Some ancient farmers reportedly chanted to the water, not just as ritual, but to teach it the paths through the canals. Whether the water listened is debatable, but people swore it did. And tonight, as the winds pick up and the rain begins again, you find yourself murmuring those same phrases under your breath. Your apprentice hears and gives you a look. Are you cursing at the storm? No, you reply, completely serious. I'm negotiating. You both cover the most vulnerable seedlings with woven leaf tents, makeshift shelters to keep the rain from stripping the leaves or crushing the younger stalks. You pile extra reed mulch around the base of the maize. You even redirect a small canal segment to drain excess water. This is farming as triage. And here comes your open scholarly debate. Were Chinampas built as a response to environmental necessity, like flooding, or were they always part of the original farming plan? Some archaeologists think Chinampas were a brilliant plan B, created after surrounding lands proved too unstable. Others argue they were always intentional, designed from the ground up as a hyper-efficient system. The truth? Probably both. When you live on water, you learn to invent around it. Night falls. The storm doesn't. Wind whips across the water, making your thatched roof groan. You and your apprentice huddle in the center of the house with the animals. One grumpy turkey, a nervous dog, and a basket of seeds you're determined not to lose. You light a candle and try to make jokes. Remember when we thought the worst part of farming was the frogs? You ask. Your apprentice raises an eyebrow. You said frogs were good luck. I also said that about the beetle in my boot, so maybe don't listen to me. Eventually, the thunder eases. The rain softens from war drum to lullaby. The animals settle. You fall asleep leaning against the seed basket. At dawn, the air is heavy, like the world is still deciding whether to storm again. You step outside, heart pounding, expecting ruin. Instead, you find green. Your chinampa has held. The maize is still upright. The beans are even taller. A few flowers droop, and a pile of mulch has floated into a corner like a sullen teenager. But overall, you survived. Your apprentice high fives you. We're water warriors, they say. You allow it. Just this once. You spend the rest of the day rebuilding small damages, rethreading a fence, replacing mulch, scooping debris from the canal. There's a kind of strange satisfaction in it. Farming after a storm is like combing tangled hair. Tedious, but intimate. You learn what bent, what broke, what flexed just enough. And then something curious happens. The soil, it's richer. The storm stirred up the canal beds and deposited new layers of organic muck across your plots. Your crops, already grateful, begin to thrive in a way they hadn't before. You swear the chilies get redder overnight. The amaranth practically sparkles. It's a weird lesson, but a valuable one. Storms aren't just disasters. They're fertilizers. And the Chinampa system, absurdly beautifully, was designed for that. Later that evening, neighbors paddle by to check in. You share tamales, stories, and compare flood damage. One farmer's chinampa drifted 10 feet before catching on another's anchor stake. Instead of arguing, they laugh. Guess we're neighbors now, someone says, and everyone nods like that's just how things go. Because out here on floating fields, the lines are always moving. The plants shift. The water decides. And you float. You fix. You adapt. Before bed, your apprentice lights a small clay lamp again, this time on their own. You don't say anything. Just watch the flame flicker on the rippling canal. The storm may come again, but now you know, so will you. Awaiting continue. Storm has passed, but something lingers in the air. You feel it the way you feel when someone says your name from behind, and you're not sure if it really happened. The days are warmer, the lake quieter, the birds stay silent longer in the morning, and then it begins. The algae bloom. You see it first as a pale green fuzz on the water's edge, just a soft shimmer like pond scum. But within a day, it thickens. What was once a crystal clear canal now has a sickly skin, floating in swirls, trapping heat, and worse, blocking sunlight from reaching your floating roots. You try not to panic, but your apprentice is already poking the making bloom with astounds. I think it's alive, they say. Like, smart alive. It's not smart, you reply, kneeling to scoop some out with a gourd. It just knows we hate it. This is a new kind of battle. Not wind, not rain, but too much fertility. The same nutrients dredged from the storm-fed canals, the ones you celebrated, are now feeding this explosion of green gunk. Your once perfect balance has tipped. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Aztec farmers were aware of the problems posed by algae blooms and stagnant water. That's why canals were designed to flow and be cleaned frequently. Farmers used nets and barriers of reeds to control overgrowth, and they kept canals shaded by planting willows and other semi-aquatic trees along the edges to reduce evaporation and temperature spikes. You and your apprentice try all the tricks, skimming the bloom daily, piling it into baskets, redirecting water from a cleaner upstream canal. It works, somewhat, but the bloom keeps returning. By the third day, your maize starts to yellow. And then your neighbor floats over in a canoe and offers a wild solution. Axayacatl. Tiny aquatic insects, she explains. They lay their eggs in algae. You can scrape the egg masses off lake reeds, dry them, and eat them. They're a delicacy. But more importantly, the insects themselves devour algae. You look at your apprentice. They shrug. Algae-eating bugs? I've swallowed worse. So, off you go. The next morning is an insect harvesting expedition. You paddle to a reed bed, careful not to disturb nesting birds, and use a woven scoop to collect clumps of what looks like damp dust. Axayacatl eggs. Tiny, grayish. Smell like low tide and old socks. But you know better than to turn your nose up at ancient wisdom. You spread the egg clumps in shallow baskets back home, near your chinampa's worst bloom pockets. Within a few days, the eggs hatch. And just like that, your canal becomes an underwater battlefield. Axayacatl larvae swarm the algae, nibbling it into oblivion. Your apprentice narrates this like it's a tiny war movie. Look at them go, take that slime army. And incredibly, it works. Within a week, The bloom fades, sunlight returns, your maize straightens, the beans bloom purple, the lake breathes again. Which brings us to today's quirky tidbit. Those very same axolotl insects, the Aztecs didn't just farm them, they prized them. Their dried eggs, called ahuautle, were served during festivals reserved for nobility and sometimes used in religious offerings. They were called the caviar of the lake. You try a bit, roasted lightly on a comal, mixed with ground chili and lime. Your apprentice makes a face. It's crunchy, like if a sunflower seed had a secret. You smile? A tasty secret. And now for our open scholarly debate. Were ancient Chinampa farmers proto-ecologists, deliberately engineering microecosystems like these insect algae balances? Or did they simply observe and imitate what nature was already doing? Some historians suggest their knowledge was far more systematic than we give credit for. Others say it was mostly generational trial and error. Either way, it worked. But just when you think things have returned to normal, a messenger arrives. He's young, out of breath, and soaked from the knees down. His canoe bears the emblem of a temple official, and he's been paddling since midnight. The lake is receding, he says. Too fast. At first, you don't believe it, but then you look. Water lines are dropping. Canals seem narrower. Lily pads cling to roots now half exposed, and when you push a reed pole into the water, it hits bottom faster than it did yesterday. This is a dry season danger you haven't faced before. Not a flood, but a thirst. The lakes that once fed your Chinampas may be vanishing, drawn down by upstream use, diverted for temple rituals, or simply evaporating too fast under an angry sun. You call your apprentice, grab tools, and begin the next phase of defense. Moisture retention, more mulch, deeper canals, night watering, shading the base of plants with banana leaves. You even consider planting water hyacinths as a shade cover, something no one's done before. The neighbors are alarmed too. There's talk of paddling upstream to speak with the priests to ask for a new rain ceremony, maybe even offer jade to the water gods. You wonder if the gods even notice anymore, or if the lake is dying for more mortal reasons. That night, you walk to the edge of the canal and dip your fingers in the water. It's warm, too warm, not the cool, dark softness of spring. Your apprentice stands beside you, quiet. What happens if it doesn't come back? You don't have an answer, but you whisper a truth. Then we build further into the lake, and we teach the next ones how. Because that's what Chinamperos do. You adapt, you float, you dream new ground into being. Awaiting continue. Water keeps dropping. You watch it disappear inch by inch like a slow leak in the bathtub of the gods. And with every inch, something changes. Fish flounder in shallow pools. The canal edges crack. Your Chinampa, so proud and lush days ago, now leans slightly as if it's bowing under the pressure. But you're not giving up, not yet. You wake up before dawn, light a small fire, and get to work. You dig channels, not just for irrigation, but for rebalancing. Water trapped in deeper canals is carefully guided toward drier beds. You line the paths with clay and woven grass to prevent loss. It's like performing surgery on a patient made of mud and roots. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Aztec farmers were expert water engineers. The Chinampa system wasn't just about growing crops, it was about controlling flow. They built sluices, spillways, even locks to regulate the movement of lake water. A city built on a lake needed not just gardens, but guardians of balance. Your apprentice has become a bit of a sluice prodigy. They even carved tiny animal heads into the canal gates, frogs for rain, snakes for transformation, ducks for good luck. I call this one Senor Wet, they say, patting a beaver-shaped spout with far too much pride. But as the water pulls back farther, things get complicated. You notice a patch of exposed lake bed, once hidden beneath your Chinampa's edge. It's sticky, foul-smelling, and oddly warm. Your dog refuses to step near it. Your apprentice says it smells like cooked fish and bad omens. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some ancient texts describe these exposed lake beds as breathless places, spots avoided by the old farmers. Not just because of the smell, but because they were considered gateways, where life and death mixed. Spirits were thought to whisper from the drying mud. You smirk at the superstition, but only a little. Still, there's a decision to make. You could retreat, move operations closer to a deeper canal, abandon some of your more remote plots, Or you could reclaim the drying edges, just like the ancients did. You choose the latter. You wade through knee-high sludge, driving new willow poles into the exposed bed. It's awful. You slip, you swear, you get an entire frog in your sandal. But by midday, you've claimed another meter of land. The Chinampa grows, just not the way you expected. And that's when it happens. Your neighbor floats over, wide-eyed. They found something, she says, a few islands over. You go. The trip takes an hour. When you arrive, a small crowd has gathered around a half-collapsed section of Chinampa, now fully exposed by the retreating water. And in the mud, half buried beneath centuries of roots and silt. Skull. Human. And next to it, ceramic shards and what looks like an obsidian blade. No one speaks for a while. Then the oldest farmer present mutters, "They buried someone in the mud. A sacrifice? A farmer?" And here's your open scholarly debate. Were Chinampas ever used as burial sites? Some researchers believe a few sacrificial offerings were made during construction, tools, plants, maybe even blood, to bless the plots. Others argue full burials like this are coincidence, a body washed here during flood or war. Regardless, the skull is carefully retrieved, wrapped in palm fiber, and offered to the local priests. A small ceremony is planned, just in case. You attend, bringing food and a single flower from your field, the tallest amaranth, deep crimson, soaked in sweat and sunlight. Later that night, back on your own plot, you reflect on how fragile this all is. Life here isn't stable. It's not guaranteed. It floats. And that's what makes it powerful. You whisper to the canal, not expecting an answer. But the frogs respond anyway, chirping and croaking in the reeds. And it makes you smile. In the morning, there's dew on the maize, a sure sign of moisture in the air. You breathe deeply, letting it fill your lungs like medicine. And just as you're about to start the day's work, a dragonfly lands on your arm. Blue wings. Gossamer. Still. Your apprentice gasps. "That's lucky, right?" You nod. It's water's promise. Then you both get back to work. Remulching, reinforcing, singing half-silly work songs about Senor Wet and his magical sluice squad. And every once in a while, you glance toward that dry patch of new land, already planning your next plot. Because if the water goes, you move with it. And if it returns, you welcome it with open arms and open soil. That's the unspoken pact between a Chinampero and the lake. Neither owns the other. They just share breath. Awaiting continue. Rise before dawn, not because something's wrong, but because something feels right. The sky has turned that dusty plum color you only see when rain is whispering in the distance. The air smells like turned earth and ozone. Your ears pick up the faintest drumbeat. No, not war drums. Thunder. Real, proper thunder. You crouch beside your maize and whisper thanks. You don't say to whom, just thanks. Around you, the Chinampa breathes. Even the willow poles seem to lean a little straighter, as if shaking off a long, dry nap. It's been weeks since the lake receded. Weeks of guessing, improvising, patching, and praying. And now, the sky finally looks heavy. Your apprentice joins you with a half-asleep yawn and a gourd of morning atole. They squint at the clouds. "Think it's going to be a big one?" You sip. Big enough. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Aztecs divided the year into 18 months of 20 days, with 5 nameless days at the end. 4 of those months were dedicated to agricultural festivals, often linked to the rains. Farmers didn't just rely on seasons. They observed stars, moon cycles, and even insect migrations to predict weather shifts. And as if to confirm the old system still works, you spot the real sign, a line of red ants marching toward higher ground. Not fleeing, but relocating. They know what's coming. So you and your apprentice set to work. You clear out the spillways, double-check the retaining walls, tie down beanstalks that grew too tall too fast, reposition the floating lily barriers to reduce wave wash. It's like preparing for a guest who always arrives messy but brings gifts in her pockets. By mid-morning, the clouds have rolled in like a gray wool blanket. The air thickens, a few drops fall, lazy and fat. And then, just as you're folding the seed tarps, it pours. Not a gentle mist, not a polite drizzle. This is lake-making rain. You laugh. Your apprentice spins in it like a child. Even the dog, who hates baths, wades in happily, tongue out. And for a moment, you remember how water is more than survival. It's joy. Wild, wet joy. But now comes the clever part, capturing it. You tilt the Chinampa slightly by digging out the opposite canal wall, letting the water flow in, but not rush through. You create micro basins between rows, forming temporary ponds for roots to drink from. You spread more mulch to hold moisture for days after the rain ends. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Chinamperos would sing special melodies during the rain, not for the plants, but for the water itself. They believed it helped the droplets settle into the soil more willingly, making the crop sweeter. One song, still hummed today in some highland regions, translates loosely to fall like laughter, settle like sleep, stay like memory. You try it. Your apprentice hums back up. You feel ridiculous. But the next day, your squash flowers open wide, wider than you've ever seen. After the storm, the lake returns, not completely, but enough. The canals refill, floating logs shift, tiny fish dart through the roots again. Even the Axiakal are back, this time content and quiet. Which brings us to a fresh challenge, celebration. Yes, really. When you survive drought, pests, bloom, and near starvation, there comes a moment when you must acknowledge you made it. So the Chinamperos gather. Each brings something small, a basket of chiles, a gourd of pulque, a bunch of fresh herbs still glistening from the rain, a single roasted grasshopper for your apprentice, who winces but eats it anyway. You sing, you joke. You tell stories about the year the maize grew sideways and the time a heron stole someone's sandal. You tell them about Senor Wet and the kids beg your apprentice to carve them one. There's a moment as the sun sets gold over the water and your Chinampa glows like a floating dream when you realize this isn't just a plot of mud and corn. This is a memory engine. Every root holds history. Every reed pole, a marker in time. And you're not just a gardener. You're a steward of this strange floating miracle. But even miracles need maintenance. So you gather up the leftovers, tuck the tools back into their hidey holes, and do one last patrol by canoe. The canals ripple softly, dragonflies flit, a frog croaks. Everything is calm, everything is breathing. And then, far off, barely visible in the fading light, you see a new Chinampa taking shape. Someone, inspired by this year's resilience, is building again. More willow poles, more mud. Another dream staked into the water. You smile. Because this story, it's never just yours, it's everyone's. Awaiting continue. Rise before dawn. Not because something's wrong, but because something feels right. The sky has turned that dusty plum color you only see when rain is whispering in the distance. The air smells like turned earth and ozone. Your ears pick up the faintest drumbeat. No, not war drums. Thunder. Real, proper thunder. You crouch beside your maize and whisper thanks. You don't say to whom, just thanks. Around you, the Chinampa breathes. Even the willow poles seem to lean a little straighter, as if shaking off a long, dry nap. It's been weeks since the lake receded, weeks of guessing, improvising, patching, and praying. And now, the sky finally looks heavy. Your apprentice joins you with a half-asleep yawn and a gourd of morning atole. They squint at the clouds. Think it's going to be a big one? You sip. Big enough. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Aztecs divided the year into 18 months of 20 days, with 5 nameless days at the end. 4 of those months were dedicated to agricultural festivals, often linked to the rains. Farmers didn't just rely on seasons. They observed stars, moon cycles, and even insect migrations to predict weather shifts. And as if to confirm the old system still works, you spot the real sign, a line of red ants marching toward higher ground, not fleeing, but relocating. They know what's coming. So you and your apprentice set to work. You clear out the spillways, double-check the retaining walls, tie down beanstalks that grew too tall too fast, reposition the floating lily barriers to reduce wave wash. It's like preparing for a guest who always arrives messy but brings gifts in her pockets. By mid-morning, the clouds have rolled in like a gray wool blanket. The air thickens. A few drops fall, lazy and fat. And then, just as you're folding the seed tarps, it pours. Not a gentle mist, not a polite drizzle. This is lake-making rain. You laugh. Your apprentice spins in it like a child. Even the dog, who hates baths, wades in happily, tongue out. And for a moment, you remember how water is more than survival. It's joy. Wild, wet joy. But now comes the clever part, capturing it. You tilt the Chinampa slightly by digging out the opposite canal wall, letting the water flow in, but not rush through. You create micro basins between rows, forming temporary ponds for roots to drink from. You spread more mulch to hold moisture for days after the rain ends. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Chinamperos would sing special melodies during the rain, not for the plants, but for the water itself. They believed it helped the droplets settle into the soil more willingly, making the crop sweeter. One song, still hummed today in some highland regions, translates loosely to fall like laughter, settle like sleep, stay like memory. You try it. Your apprentice hums back up. You feel ridiculous. But the next day, your squash flowers open wide, wider than you've ever seen. After the storm, the lake returns. Not completely, but enough. The canals refill, floating logs shift, tiny fish dart through the roots again. Even the Axia cattle are back, this time content and quiet. Which brings us to a fresh challenge. Celebration. Yes, really. When you survive drought, pests, bloom, and near starvation, there comes a moment when you must acknowledge you made it. So the Chinamperos gather. Each brings something small, a basket of chiles, a gourd of pulque, a bunch of fresh herbs still glistening from the rain, a single roasted grasshopper for your apprentice, who winces but eats it anyway. You sing, you joke, you tell stories about the year the maize grew sideways and the time a heron stole someone's sandal. You tell them about Senor Wet, and the kids beg your apprentice to carve them one. There's a moment, as the sun sets gold over the water and your chinampa glows like a floating dream, when you realize this isn't just a plot of mud and corn. This is a memory engine. Every root holds history, every reed pole a marker in time. And you're not just a gardener. You're a steward of this strange floating miracle. But even miracles need maintenance, so you gather up the leftovers, tuck the tools back into their hidey holes, and do one last patrol by canoe. The canals ripple softly, dragonflies flit, a frog croaks, everything is calm, everything is breathing. And then, far off, barely visible in the fading light, you see a new Chinampa taking shape. Someone, inspired by this year's resilience, is building again. More willow poles, more mud. Another dream staked into the water, you smile. Because this story, it's never just yours. It's everyone's. Awaiting Tinyu. It begins again. Not in some big dramatic thunderclap, but with the quiet return of rhythm. Water laps against your Chinampa's edge in its old familiar pulse. The frogs return to their nightly gossip. The air smells like wet leaves and soil, not desperation. You roll up your sleeves and get back to it. There's harvesting to do. Maize, beans, chiles, and the amaranth, tall as your apprentice now. You work slowly, not out of laziness, but reverence. Every ear of corn feels like a small miracle you help bring into the world. You glance over at your apprentice. They're better now, stronger, more confident, sunburned in that I know what I'm doing kind of way. They balance a crate of squash like a tray of golden babies. You don't say it, but you're proud. Here's your mainstream historical fact. At the height of the Aztec Empire, Chinampas produced so much food they could feed hundreds of thousands. Tenochtitlan's vast marketplaces, including the famous Tlatelolco, thrived off this lake-grown bounty. Some scholars estimate up to 7 harvests per year were possible on well-managed plots. And yet, there's no standing still. Just as quickly as a harvest comes, so too does the next threat. This time, it's not water or bugs, it's people. You hear whispers. The empire is changing. More tribute, more soldiers passing through. A strange sickness hitting some villages. The wind that leaves you weeping. The elders talk about bad omens, burning stars, coughing birds, strangers arriving by water with metal and horses. Historians still argue whether the Chinampa system declined before the arrival of the Spanish or because of it. Some say the floods and droughts had already started taking a toll. Others believe conquest interrupted the delicate chain of canal maintenance and ritual care, letting the system collapse from neglect. You don't know what the future holds. But you do know this. Your Chinampa is still here, and so are you. You keep planting, keep weaving reed mats, keep telling your apprentice all the small tricks, the turn of the wrist when transplanting saplings, how to read the clouds over the volcanoes, how to keep spiders out of your squash blossoms without hurting them. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some Chinamperos believe that talking kindly to your plants would make them grow faster. So, you try it. You crouch by your tomatoes and whisper, "You are doing incredible, sweetie." Your apprentice walks by, raising an eyebrow. "You okay? Just bonding." They shrug. "You're weird." You grin. "You're welcome." The seasons turn. The lake deepens again. You begin experimenting with new companion crops. Maybe chaya next to beans, or even a few tobacco leaves, just to try. Your old neighbor builds a new chinampa beside yours. You help drive the first poles. And one night, as you lay on your back between rows of maize, staring up at the stars, it hits you. The chinampa isn't just a plot of land. It's a method, a mindset, a way of folding yourself into nature without overpowering it, of learning the rules of water, soil, sun, and then dancing with them like partners at a never-ending wedding. Even now, centuries later, a few Chinampas survive in places like Xochimilco. They creak, they struggle, but they still float. And some modern farmers, rebellious and brilliant, are trying to revive the system. Not for nostalgia, but for survival, for food sovereignty, for hope. You would like them. You'd probably argue about bean spacing, and maybe trade obsidian jokes, but you'd recognize each other. Because once you've grown on water, once you've trusted roots to hold hands with a lake, you never quite forget the feeling, the breath of it, the quiet, humming miracle of mud and maize and memory. And that's where we leave you, on your chinampa. Rain-damp hair, dirty hands, a smile hiding behind your exhaustion. You made it. Not because everything was easy, but because you adapted again and again and again. Wind down. Now, let your hands relax. Let the soil fall from your fingers. Feel the rhythm of the water, slow, steady, sure. The stars are just beginning to shimmer above the lake. You hear an oar dip into water somewhere in the distance. Maybe it's your neighbor heading home. Maybe it's a memory drifting across the centuries. Let it pass. You're warm, safe, full. Your harvest is behind you. Your next planting is still far enough away that it doesn't bother your thoughts. Tonight, there is only the hum of frogs, the rustle of leaves, the gentle lapping of water at the Chinampa's edge. Every sound blends into a lullaby written by the earth herself. And though the empire may rise and fall, though empires always do, your floating garden remains, balanced between sky and lake, suspended like a dream. So sleep now, Chinamparo. The soil has your back. The willows watch over you, and the lake, ancient patient, will rock you gently until morning. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.